In 1986, a 12-year-old girl rode her bicycle home to make lunch for her little sisters. She never made it back to the park. For over 3 decades, her killer walked free.
March 26, 1986, Tacoma, Washington. It's an ordinary Wednesday. Michella Welch, 12 years old, the kind of big sister who takes her younger siblings out to play, brings her 2 little sisters to Puget Park in Tacoma's North End. It's the kind of neighborhood park where kids build entire days out of nothing. Bikes, sandwiches, sunshine. Around 10 o'clock, the girls are playing. Around 11, Michella does something completely unremarkable. She hops on her bike and rides home to make lunch. Sandwiches for her and her sisters. She plans to bring them back to the park for a picnic. She never gets the chance. While she's gone, her sisters leave the play area briefly to find a restroom nearby. When they come back, they keep playing until around 2 in the afternoon, when they notice something wrong. Michella's bicycle is sitting at their meeting spot. The sandwiches are laid out, untouched, but Michella isn't there. Imagine being one of those little girls. You're staring at your sister's bike, at lunch she made for you with her own hands, and she's just gone. They tell their babysitter. The babysitter calls their mother, and that call sets off a chain reaction
that would consume the Tacoma Police Department, on and off, for the next 36 years. Police are called. A search begins. Hours pass. And then, just before 11 that night, a search and rescue dog does what searchers dread most. It leads officers into an isolated part of a gulch inside the park, more than a quarter mile from where the girls had been playing. Michella's body is found there. The medical examiner would later determine she died from blunt force trauma and a cut to her throat. There was evidence of sexual assault. We're not going to dwell on those details, because this story isn't really about what was done to her. It's about who did it and how long it took to find out. Witnesses would later recall something chilling. Earlier that day, someone reported seeing Michella talking with a man who appeared to be pointing down a trail into the very ravine where she'd be found hours later. That detail is the closest thing investigators had to a description of a killer in 1986. And it wasn't enough. Here's what makes this case even more disturbing. Michella Welch wasn't the only one. 5 months later, in August of 1986, another Tacoma girl, 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian, disappeared while riding her bike through Point Defiance Park, just a few miles away. Her body was found in a wooded area off a trail more than 2 weeks later. Same city, same age range, same method. Girls alone on bicycles in public parks, taken and left in the woods. Investigators did the only thing that made sense with the evidence they had. They assumed one person was responsible for both crimes. A 6-person task force was formed. Detectives poured more than 10,000 investigative hours into these 2 cases. Thousands of tips came in. Neighborhoods were canvassed. Tacoma, a city that hadn't thought of itself as a place where children vanish from parks in broad daylight, was gripped by fear. And then, nothing. No arrest, no named suspect. The trail went cold, and it stayed cold for decades. In 2006, there was a small step forward. Using semen evidence collected during Michella's original autopsy, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab was able to build a male DNA profile of her killer. It was run against CODIS, the FBI's national database of over 11 million criminal DNA profiles. No match.
Whoever did this had no criminal record on file. He wasn't in the system. He was, by every measure available to police at the time, invisible. For years, that DNA profile just sat there, a digital fingerprint with no name attached to it. The case, like so many cold cases, risked becoming a story people only told each other, not one investigators could actually close. But here's the twist nobody in 1986 could have predicted. The answer wasn't going to come from a fingerprint database, a tip line, or a confession. It was going to come from people who had never even heard of Michella Welch, uploading their own DNA to genealogy websites just to find out where their great-grandparents came from. By 2013, something remarkable happened in the investigation. Not an arrest, but a correction. A re-examination of the physical evidence revealed that the DNA profiles from the Welch and Bastian crime scenes didn't match each other. For 27 years, investigators and the public had operated on the assumption that a single serial killer was responsible for both girls' deaths. They were wrong. Two different men had committed two horrifyingly similar crimes, independently, within months of each other, in the same small city. That revelation didn't solve anything. If anything, it doubled the mystery. But it also refocused the investigation. And in 2015 and 2016, Tacoma police tried something new: DNA phenotyping. Working with a Virginia-based lab called Parabon Nanolabs, investigators used the unknown DNA profile to generate a predicted physical description of Michella's killer. Not a photograph, but a scientific composite, estimating traits like skin tone, eye color, hair color, and ancestry. The report suggested fair skin, brown eyes, brown hair, and a small trace of northern Native American ancestry. It wasn't a name, but it was enough to reopen the case as if it had happened yesterday. Around 60 people, including the FBI and Pierce County's Department of Emergency Management, took part in a renewed cold case exercise, treating a 30-year-old file with the urgency of a case that was still warm. Before we go further, this is the point in the case where everything is about to change. So if you want to sit with us for the rest of it, go ahead and hit subscribe now and drop your thoughts in the comments. Now, back to Tacoma. In 2018, Tacoma detective Steve Riopel began working directly with a genetic genealogist at Parabon. This is where the science gets almost unbelievable in its precision. Genetic genealogy doesn't just look for exact matches, it looks for family. The unknown DNA profile from 1986 was compared against public genealogy databases, the same kind of databases regular people use to build family trees, find long-lost cousins, or figure out where their ancestors came from. Slowly, painstakingly, investigators built outward from partial matches, tracing branches of a family tree using publicly available records, until they arrived at two living brothers in Washington state. One of them, they believed, was Michella's killer. Now think about that for a moment. Somewhere out there, a family had been going about their lives for 32 years with no idea their own DNA, shared, inherited, completely ordinary, was about to hand police the answer they'd been chasing since 1986. Surveillance began. And that's when Detective Riopel found himself in a Tacoma restaurant, watching one of those two brothers, a man named Gary Hartman, having coffee with a coworker. Hartman wasn't a stranger to public trust. He was a registered nurse, working for Washington State's Department of Social and Health Services, including time as a community nurse specialist at Western State Hospital, a psychiatric facility. For decades, he had been, by outward appearance, unremarkable. A colleague, a neighbor, someone you'd have no reason to look at twice. Riopel watched him use a paper napkin, repeatedly, then watched him crumple it, stuff it into a bag, crumple the bag, and throw it away as he left. That napkin never touched Hartman's hand again, but it left with Detective Riopel. It was sent to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, and within 2 weeks, the answer came back. The DNA on that napkin matched the DNA collected from Michella Welch's body in 1986. 32 years of silence ended by a piece of trash he never thought twice about. On June 20th, 2018, police made a traffic stop and took Gary Hartman into custody. 2 days later, he was formally charged with first-degree murder and rape in the death of Michella Welch. Bail was set at $5 million. At a press conference, Tacoma police walked the public through details of that day in 1986, some of them for the very first time. And Pierce County's prosecutor at the time, Mark Lindquist, made a point of connecting the dots publicly. The murders of Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian, he said, were among the very reasons the department had formed a cold case team in the first place. Because remember, Jennifer Bastian's case was still unsolved too.
Hartman's case took nearly 4 years to reach trial, delayed significantly by the court closures of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's 4 more years of waiting for a family that had already waited 32. When it finally reached Pierce County Superior Court in March of 2022, Hartman made an unusual choice. He waived his right to a jury and requested a bench trial, meaning a single judge, Stanley J. Rumbaugh, would decide his fate alone. The defense argument, as reported from the trial, was striking. Attorneys suggested that Hartman's mental health and addiction issues had been so severe that he had genuinely convinced himself, for years, that he hadn't committed the crime, only to wake up in a jail cell and confront the reality of what he'd done. It didn't take Judge Rumbaugh long. After less than 2 hours, he returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Hartman, by then in his 70s and needing a walker to move through the courtroom, broke down. He apologized, repeatedly, through tears, telling the court how sorry he was, that he knew it didn't help, that he was just sorry. Judge Rumbaugh sentenced him to 26 years and 6 months in prison. Given Hartman's age, the judge made clear what everyone in that courtroom already understood. This was, in every practical sense, a life sentence. Hartman is reported to be serving that sentence today at Airway Heights Correction Center in Washington. Before sentencing, the court gave Michella's family the chance to speak. Her mother, Barbara Leonard, didn't mince words, telling the judge she wanted him locked up and the key thrown away, adding that while it wouldn't bring her daughter back, justice would finally be served. And then something happened that, honestly, still catches people off guard when they hear this story. Michella's sister, one of the 2 little girls who had waited by that bicycle and those untouched sandwiches back in 1986, stood up and said she forgave him. Not because what he did was forgivable in any ordinary sense, but because, in her words, holding on to that pain any longer would only let him take more from her than he already had. For 27 years, investigators believed one man was responsible for the deaths of both Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian. DNA proved that assumption wrong. 2 separate men, 2 eerily similar crimes, months apart, in the same city. That alone should tell you how easily even careful, well-intentioned investigators can be led astray by a theory that simply feels true. And it's worth sitting with the method that finally worked. Investigators didn't crack this case by cross-referencing criminal records. They cracked it because ordinary people, total strangers with no connection to this case, had uploaded their own DNA to genealogy websites out of simple curiosity about their own family history. That data, combined with old-fashioned public records research, built a bridge from a 32-year-old unidentified sample all the way to 2 living brothers in Washington state. It's the same technique that had recently identified the Golden State Killer, and it would go on to become one of the most significant tools in American law enforcement for closing cases that everyone had assumed would stay open forever. Washington state would go on to name new legislation around this kind of DNA evidence after Michella Welch and Jennifer Bastian, a small but permanent mark these 2 girls left on how their state handles cold cases going forward. At the center of all of this,
The DNA science, the surveillance, the bench trial, the sentencing is a 12-year-old girl who rode her bike home to make lunch for her sisters. That's who this story actually belongs to. Not the napkin, not the genealogy database, not even the 32 years it took to get an answer. Michella Welch was somebody's daughter, somebody's big sister, the kind of kid who takes her little sisters to the park and makes them sandwiches without being asked.
Her family carried her absence for more than 3 decades without a name to attach to their grief. And when they finally got one, what they chose to do with it says more about who they are than anything Gary Hartman ever will. Take a moment. Not for the science, not for the arrest, not for the trial. Just for Michella, 12 years old, riding home to make lunch for her sisters. If this case stayed with you, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from.